Baltimore's Francis Scott Key Bridge tragedy is terrible. It fell recently because of a cargo ship that ran into it. I'm not sure exactly what all has happened yet. Hello, welcome to This Week's Economy. I'm your host, Dr. Vance Ginn. I hope you're having a prosperous day. Well, today is episode 54 of This Week's Economy. So thank you for joining me again today. It's remarkable that we've had more than a year's worth of This Week's Economy. So as usual, I'm going to jump right into it because there's a lot to talk about. I'm going to explain why we should be cautious about the federal government rebuilding the Baltimore Bridge, this horrible tragedy that happened there. But let's make sure that's not too costly. I'm also going to talk about the optimal educational freedom approach. You don't want to miss that. And who holds our national debt and more. Thank you for subscribing and sharing it with your family and friends. Also, become a paid subscriber today to support my work at vanceginn.substack.com. And remember, you can find all of this and much more at vanceginn.com if you just want to make that easy as possible. So let's dive into the news. Baltimore's Francis Scott Key Bridge tragedy is terrible. It fell recently because of a cargo ship that ran into it. I'm not sure exactly what all has happened yet, and there's still a lot of investigation that's taking place. It did look like the power went off a couple times before it hit one of the columns of the bridge, and then most of the bridge collapsed. But this is going to take a huge hit, not only to the port there and the channel that's there, but also for people driving across the bridge. So this is going to have a likely long-term impact on that area. So my prayers go out to the family and friends hurt by this situation. I will say, though, that I am concerned with President Biden saying that he wants to go out and build the bridge. Getting the federal government involved with this and its massive red tape and red ink is bad news, because what are they going to do? They're going to make it more costly in the process. And remember that we already have $34 trillion in national debt. We're running more than $2 trillion a year in deficits. So this is all coming out of our pockets. And so a small share of Americans are using this bridge. And yes, we receive some of the cargo that comes from it, but this should be done more locally. Also, there's a lot of insurance that's provided for things of this nature. We should go that route instead of saying that every emergency should be paid for by taxpayers. That's not a form of free market capitalism. That is big government in the process. So yes, maybe the federal government can help, maybe even reduce some of the restrictions and things of that nature they have on a lot of the building that can take a lot of time and effort, but otherwise they should be getting out of the way. So I'll keep an eye on that and see what happens. I have another piece out, or not another piece out, but I was talking recently on X, formerly known as Twitter, about which countries hold the most of our debt. It's unlikely the ones that you think. And do they hold much of our debt overall? And so I was looking at this recently. Japan holds the most amount of our debt, about 1.1 trillion. And $8 trillion of our $34 trillion is held by another country, so foreign holdings. So about 25% of our debt is held outside of the United States, so not a huge amount. And then even smaller amount of that whenever you consider each country. So Japan has 1.1 trillion, which is 13.5% of total foreign debt held, or 3.2% of the $34 trillion. China is number 2 at $797 billion. They have 10% of the total foreign held debt, or 2.3% of gross federal debt. And then the UK is $753 billion, which is 9.4% of the foreign held debt, or 2.2% of gross federal debt. So what this says then is that foreign held debt is a very small portion of the overall debt. There's a lot of look at this, what China's doing and everything else, but they're actually number 2. Number 1 is Japan, which is an ally, which is one reason why the Nikon Steel deal should go through. We got to get over some of these, these things that are set out in the media or by talking heads that just aren't true. We've really got to know who's out there. So most of the debt is held by Americans, which is why it's draining economic activity and must stop soon because of higher interest rates and inflation and everything else that's going on. So that's something we need to keep an eye on. Why do some on the right want more government in our lives? It seems to be that they claim people want more government, so the right, quote unquote, Republicans can win more elections. But will that work? There was a piece out recently posted on Twitter by Orrin Cass of American Compass, and a poll that they did basically showing that people want more things from government, but at the same time, less than a majority of all the demographics and political affiliation that people had showed that they did not want to pay more for this. And so there's this hypocrisy that's going on. They want more, but not willing to pay for it. That's why we're running $34 trillion in national debt, and more than that, in unfunded liabilities. We've got to become sane about this. And so some are pushing this idea that government can continue to do more and solve problems, but government is typically the problem and will become even more of the problem if we expand it and have more government spending, more deficits and debt and everything else. So let's stop going down this route of the national conservative view. Let's move more toward freedom conservatism, libertarianism, whatever you want to call it. Classical liberalism is what I like to call it. That's really where we need to be. And speaking of the expansions of government, though, this also includes Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, who signed a bill this week that would ban minors under 14 from social media and online and give parental improvement for 14 and 15-year-olds. While this seems good on the surface, what does it mean to you? I had a piece out in the Center Square talking about the cost of this. It's a very slippery slope. It also means age verification for everyone, because if you've got to prove if you're not under 15, if you're 15 or younger, you got to make sure that you're older than that in order to be on social media. That means all of us now have age verification. So that is a conflict, a violation of our rights to be able to use online and everything else. Puts another thing in the place between the kid and the parent. Now the parents can't make the decisions for their kids, whether that be for educational purposes or something else. The government's coming in Florida and stepping in and saying, you know what, we know better than you, parent. We're going to do this. And it's also hypocritical in the sense that Governor DeSantis, Governor Abbott, and some others have been out there promoting empowerment, parent empowerment for putting their kids through school choice, right? Educational freedom, while at the same time saying that kids don't know, or parents don't know what their kids are going to be doing online. So we've got to ban them from doing that, or ban students and kids from doing that. So this is very hypocritical in my view. We should let parents be empowered with information, maybe with more education and schooling for the kids about social media, but don't ban this stuff. It's going to have huge longer term consequences because of this. And it will disincentivize parents to parent and be better parents in the process and be more engaged with their kids. So I'm skeptical. Actually, I don't think this should happen at all. I think it's going to be unconstitutional and it'll go through the courts for a while. So we'll see how that takes place. Speaking of school choice, though, the school choice in House Bill 745 in Louisiana by State Representative Julie Emerson advances through the House Education Committee. This is what I consider, or being told that it's universal school choice. So I'm hopeful that this will continue to go through. Governor Jeff Landry of Louisiana has already said that he's willing to pass it and he wants this to go through. So I'm hopeful that this will happen in Louisiana. And it's interesting too, speaking of school choice, that Texas hasn't passed it yet. It would be phenomenal for Louisiana to do this beforehand and stop the outflow of people that are leaving Louisiana because they have a better educated workforce in the process. But Texas has the best chance to pass school choice in the next session in January 2025. So the goal, because of a lot of these primary elections, are providing this bold school choice opportunity. So this goal should be to optimize educational freedom. Governor Greg Abbott and Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick said at Texas Public Policy Foundation's Policy Summit last week, which I attended, which is a great event that they had there, that passing universal school choice in 2025 is a top priority. So I explained what this top priority should look like in a recent piece at Texas Scorecard, where I lay out, what that should be. Well, we should revamp the school finance system, make it more simple, less costly, and also lower property tax in the process. So don't check that out. Be sure to check that out. Credit card late fees case against the CFPB should be held in Texas. Texas entities are pushing this case, which the CFPB is this idea of capping late fees for credit cards, which is a bad idea. It's going to hurt the people who need credit the most because there has to be some form of rationing. And this overall case, or this rule by CFPB, should be overturned. But it really should be in Texas. This is where all the action's at. Texas Association of Business and others are putting this case forward. So this is where it should be. For my media hits and more, check out my 40-minute interview on C-SPAN Washington Journal, where I talk about my podcast, Let People Prosper, which you're listening to, Bidenomics, free markets, and much more. It's my first time on C-SPAN. Great opportunity. Please check it out. Listen to my interview on KTR's Nate's Houston about the stock market bubble. Just so much of liquidity put in there there placed by the Federal Reserve. That money's got to go somewhere, and it's bubbling up or overpricing a lot of these stocks. So be careful about where you're putting your assets. Make sure it's a broad-based portfolio. Don't miss my interview on the Federalist Radio Hour with Emily Jashinsky on my podcast, Economy, Freedom, Conservatism versus National Conservatism, and much more. It was a great conversation. I hope you'll check that one out. Read my recent book review at AIER on John Cochran's book, The Fiscal Theory of the Price Level. And don't miss my LPP episode with him, because that was a great discussion. Look, I think he's got an interesting viewpoint on what's happening with inflation, but ultimately it's about the Fed. They're the primary mover, if you will, of how much money is in circulation, and therefore inflation compared with what government fiscal policy is doing. Don't miss this week's episode of the Let People Prosper Show with Dr. Ed Timmons on the flaws in most government-created occupational licenses and how they hurt workers and consumers. We discuss doctors versus nurse practitioners. We discuss cosmetologists versus EMTs and so much more. Don't miss that one. And don't miss the upcoming episode on Monday with Dr. John Phelan on the importance of social capital for people to prosper. The quote of the week is by President Ronald Reagan. The 9 most terrifying words in the English language are, quote, "I'm from the government and I'm here to help." Government is the problem. We got to get government out of the way. And this is so true by what President Reagan said. The Bible verse of the week is Mark 11:24. Therefore, I tell you, whatever you ask in prayer, believe that you received it and you have received it, and it will be yours. I ask in prayer for you, for me, my family, and yours. And I hope that we continue to prosper in so many ways. And please go out and give me a 5-star rating. Share this with your friends and family. And until next time, let people prosper.